Infinity Pool by Brandon Cronenberg, which is yet another film set in a luxury context, talking about people who have huge amounts of disposable income. It is about a writer and his girlfriend who go to this resort in a fictional island, probably in the Caribbean, called the Lil Tolka, or the Tolka people. Very early on in the film, this writer figure played by Alexander Skarsgård accidentally runs someone over, some working class, but he breaches the protocol. He breaks out of the resort for a laugh, for a bit of a joyride, and ends up
totaling
so it has this sort of headless woman atmosphere, Lucretia Martel, a film about someone running someone over and it being erased. But in this case, it's a far more frivolous, kind of stylized in a Spring Breakers style fashion, full of gore and guts. The premise is basically that he won't get punished for this if he agrees to have a double made of himself, which a double person that contains his memories that will then be summarily executed. And then this triggers this sort of strange anxiety and ambiguity around whether the double is in fact him and whether he is the double.
That it almost kind of loses it kind of loses touch with that in a way, because it picks up this other narrative. This other narrative is that there is a coterie of expats and holiday goers on the island who are all obviously foreigners, who have found in this doubling loophole a kind of free reign to commit murder and acts of brutality because there is no consequence. So this is a film that's really saying, it's not necessarily probing the existential quandary of am I who I think I am? Am I myself? It's probing the quandary of without the threat of punishment, mortal punishment, ultimate punishment, would people act? Would they be aroused by bloodlust? And so the film obviously explores this kind of excessive, like it's almost like giallo B-movie Buñuel.
Yeah, it's made in a very clumsy and irritating way. It has extreme close-ups constantly and very
stabbing,
very extreme. Yeah, and it thinks that the way to intensify is to turn things up and zoom things in, which I think is a misunderstanding of like the extraordinary subtlety and contradiction that you can inject the cinematic process with, without going into too much detail and giving too many examples. But that it's very turned all the way up, which makes it simultaneously sort of oppressive to watch at the time, but then very, very banal on reflection. It doesn't get under your skin in the way that Cronenberg's father's work does at its best, or indeed,
I think there's something about there's
also Mia Goth we should mention.
Mia Goth's extraordinary.
There's this
really
extraordinary, very posh woman she plays. Hello, who obviously
come on, James.
Her basic position in relation to the Alexander Skarsgård character is to be a kind of seductress who takes him down this path of sin, and constantly sort of, whenever he wavers, constantly challenging his masculinity.
Yeah, she emasculates him. He's a writer, so she reads his negative reviews to him, and so taunts him. There's an interesting parallel with this, or the negative parallel. I'm making it anyway, but with Crash, so his father's film Crash, which explores not so much a removal of a consequence, but people for whom consequence doesn't matter anymore, which is people who become erotically fixated on vehicular death, their own and death of other people. And it becomes it's like a psychosexual pathology. And like that, there's a coterie of insiders, people who are united by their kink and their perversion. And this film has this coterie, but unlike that, it is making a less interesting point about, whereas for Daddy Cronenberg, it's the kink and the perversion and that taboo that interests him. Whereas here, it's merely a kind of judicial, would you go mad if you didn't go to prison or because for killing people? It's like, and
I think Crash just gets to the heart of what it is to to have a desire that might not actually be good for people, which is like a very extraordinary and daunting generative feeling. Whereas this film is about is sort of making a nihilistic wager about human nature and human behavior. I compare it to Triangle of Sadness in this regard, because they're both films about the super rich, and they're both films that sort of that imply that basically, given half a chance, most people would just for the fun of it, just out of sheer boredom and a desire for an individualist desire for power, would just oppress and exploit others and laugh about it. And I think I don't like to inject my politics into critique very often, but as someone who has a Marxist analysis of capitalism, like, I believe people do evil things because of structures of power that have been created, because of mechanisms.
Not because a juridical rule has been suspended.
Not because we're not just like violent animals.
Yeah, cynical.
Who are only behaving because the rules are there. Neither are we, of course, incapable of committing. We're certainly capable of committing these nasty acts, but I would say these nasty acts happen precisely because humanity has been kind of suppressed rather than.
But it's interesting how this has been in the water with Triangle of Sadness. It's been in the water with Westworld, and I feel this is a compatriot to the Westworld series, like White Lotus, Triangle of Sadness. I think the final thing I'll say, so there's a narrative conceit in this film that he decides to stay longer, and his wife goes home. He claims he's lost his passport, but he's really hidden it because he wants to kill. A
bit like Sundown, which like
Sundown. I will say, ladies and gentlemen, I lost my passport this morning, so I will be staying in Berlin for an additional 2 days. As
far as we know, you didn't hide it.
I haven't hidden it on purpose. I'm not going to join a sort of fanatical cult of murderers.
Although we are in Berlin.
We are in Berlin, so they probably are here. If anyone is out there that wants to go and murder and commit sprees of violence, hit me up. I'm going to be here for another 48 hours. That's a parody, by the way. Hopefully the police side don't raid this house. But yeah, so should we hit the next and final?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose one thing I wanted to say, just, I'm not a huge fan of horror films. So I think, there probably will be people who see this film and just like get a thrill out of like the squeamishness and the jump scares. But yes, I think for me, a good horror film is one that really gets under the skin of our anxieties rather than like needlessly making us feel anxious.
Rather than making us feel anxious.
And therefore gives us some kind of mediation or some kind of understanding of like the root of our anxieties, rather than a film which just needlessly prods at our anxieties for 90 minutes and then kind of just lets us go and keeps us in a state of boring, banal fear.